A reading from Isaiah. Here is my servant, whom I uphold, my chosen, in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the nations. He will not cry or lift up his voice, or make it heard in the street. A bruised reed he will not break, and a dimly burning wick he will not quench. He will faithfully bring forth justice. He will not grow faint or be crushed until he has established justice in the earth, and the coastlands wait for his teachings. Thus says God the Lord, who created the heavens and stretched them out, who spread out the earth and what comes from it, who gives breath to the people upon it, and spirit to those who walk in it. I am the Lord. I have called you in righteousness. I have taken you by the hand and kept you. I have given you as a covenant to the people, a light to the nations, to open the eyes that are blind, to bring out the prisoners from the dungeons, from the prisons those who sit in the darkness. I am the Lord, that is my name. My glory I give to no other, nor my praise to idols. See, the former things have come to pass, and new things I now declare. Before they spring forth, I tell you of them. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
The second reading is from Acts. Peter began to speak to Cornelius and his household. I truly understand that God shows no partiality, but in every nation, anyone who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him. You know the message he sent to the people of Israel, preaching peace by Jesus Christ. He is Lord of all. That message spread throughout Judea, beginning in Galilee after the baptism that John announced, how God anointed Jesus of Nazareth with the Holy Spirit and with power, how he went about doing good and healing all who were oppressed by the devil, for God was with him. We are witnesses to all that he did, both in Judea and Jerusalem. They put him to death by hanging him on a tree. But God raised him on the third day and allowed him to appear, not to all the people, but to us who were chosen by God as witnesses, and who ate and drank with him after he rose from the dead. He commanded us to preach to the people and to testify that he is the one ordained by God as judge of the living and the dead. All the prophets testify about him, that everyone who believes in him receives forgiveness of sins through his name. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
The Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus came from Galilee to John at the Jordan to be baptized by him. John would have prevented him, saying, I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me? But Jesus answered him, Let it be so now, for it is proper for us in this way to fulfill all righteousness. Then he consented. And when Jesus had been baptized, just as he came up out of the water, suddenly the heavens were opened to him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased. The Gospel of the Lord. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
A bruised reed he will not break, and a dimly burning wick he will not quench. Stories are the most prominent biblical way of helping us see ourselves in God's story. And focusing on specific characters sometimes gives us clarity. I have on occasion suggested that we model ourselves on the faithfulness of a Martha or a Mary. Or I've said that we're not so different than Jonah, who resented God's sheer grace and mercy and willingness to change God's mind and forgive rather than punish. Jonah didn't like it. In thinking about the readings for today, I thought that not only can we relate to specific characters, but also to objects or descriptions, metaphors used to draw us deeper into the biblical story. Behold my servant whom I uphold, my chosen in whom my soul delights. In the first reading from Isaiah, Isaiah is not speaking about himself or about someone else among his fellow Israelites, but he's proclaiming Jesus. Jesus is the one in whom God's soul delights, the one who at his baptism was called the Beloved. The description continues, he, the servant, as in Jesus, will not cry aloud or lift up his voice or make it heard in the street. He does not push himself aggressively on anyone. All things and people are precious in his sight. And here follows the metaphor. A bruised reed he will not break, and a dimly burning wick he will not quench. Reeds, because of their high proportion of soft fibers, were used for pens. They absorbed the dye and could be written with. Well, wicks were made from broken flax fibers that could not be woven properly. Neither are of much value since they were cheap and readily available, yet they are still handled carefully by the servant. It is as though Isaiah is saying that which is most fragile, or perhaps insignificant, will not be destroyed, abandoned, or snuffed out. And yet the end of the phrase is, he will faithfully bring forth justice in the earth, and the coastlands wait for his law. I dare say that we in fact might be the bruised reeds and dimly burning wicks. How so? Perhaps you no longer feel as sure about what you once believed about God. Your certainty has been bruised, sometimes because we get lost in the earthly stuff, and then when the unthinkable happens, life will never be the same. We may be bruised by grief or sadness because we were reminded once again that what is central to us for a time is always subject to death. Or perhaps you neglected God for so long that only an ember remains. Life got in the way. Or the church disappointed you, so you stopped coming for a while. And yet, here you are, assured that God will never break us or snuff us out, ever. We see this most clearly when we look to Jesus, because to look deeply at Jesus is to see God. It was announced at the Jordan when Jesus was baptized. Jesus was not baptized because he needed to be. No, there was no sin, no old Adam that needed drowning. But this event provides us with another epiphany. And the word you may remember means to reveal or make known. And at his baptism, Jesus is revealed as the beloved Son of God. Well, if you peek ahead in Matthew's gospel, or perhaps you remember, the next thing that happens to Jesus immediately after the baptism is that he is tempted in the wilderness. Jesus walks out of the water and into a wilderness filled with that which would try to deter him from being who he was, who God announced him to be. And bruised reeds and dimly burning wicks that we are, this world sometimes tries to make us doubt whose we are. But we know we are God's beloved, God's children. And so God does not intend to crush us or snuff us out. Here's the thing, however. We seem to be getting a little more bruised lately in that the world is in such a state that the sort of justice, freedom, and wholeness that Isaiah proclaims seems far more distant than it has, at least in my memory. I felt some bruising and diminishing embers the other evening when my brother, who is on a Navy ship, texted that they were on high alert and shipping out to parts unknown, which is to say I can't tell you. But hey, I listen to the news. I can guess. But by the next day, it was as though the Spirit had blown on the embers and stoked them up a bit. Because no Americans were killed in the attack from Iranian forces, things calmed down considerably, and he texted again. The ship didn't go out. But who knows what tomorrow might bring? It feels like dark clouds surround us. Some call them evil, but who's to say? Because again, we are all bruised reeds, bruised in the scuffles about climate change, healthcare, international relations, and impeachment proceedings. There are angry voices calling one another names: misogynist, racist, homophobe, liar. And there's no shortage of blame for anything that's gone wrong. And again, sometimes the loudest voices are those who claim us to be a Christian nation. Really? It seems to me that we do not understand God very well at all. Read Isaiah. God won't bring justice by stomping on the bad guys. Verses 2 and 3 imply gentleness, tenderness, constant wooing, encouraging, loving, the way the best parents we can imagine would teach their children how to live faithfully. It's not for lack of power that God chooses this way to bring justice. We're talking about the God of the cosmos, who created a universe far more vast and complex and wonderful than anything we can even imagine. Verse 6 tells us that God takes us by the hand, what an image, and teaches us that justice is a way of being, a way of living in a relationship with respect, a relationship of respect and love with all of God's creation. God could impose justice, but that would take away the precious gift of freedom, the gift we were given when we were created, creatures made in the image and likeness of God. At his baptism, Jesus identified himself with the faults and failures, the pains and challenges of all the bruised people who flocked to the river in need of the Spirit to stoke up the diminishing flames of life. And as God's children, Jesus shows us how to never break those who are bruised and to never extinguish the flickering flame of another. And to confirm it, Jesus, who rose from the waters of the Jordan and rose from the dead, proclaimed at the last that the ultimate form of love is forgiveness. The ultimate form of love is forgiveness. You too are called beloved of God, as am I. So let's live like it, scattering the darkness with the light of Christ for all the world to see. Amen.